Alright, you asked for it and here you are. You guys asked for a mix breakdown on how I mixed my previous beat. This beat right here, if you haven't seen it yet, then you are definitely missing out on a fire production tip and tricks. So go check it out by clicking the link right here, and I'll also leave the link of the video in the description. With that said, in this video, I'll show you exactly how I mix all the elements of this beat, going through each element I added with their insert plugin. Yes, before this is what it sounded like, and what you have to listen for is the guitar melody, which sounds quiet, and the whole mix, it sounds quiet as well. And after all the processing, we have a professionally mixed track that sounds like this. So now you can hear the guitar melody and all the elements in the beat. Without much ado, let's jump straight into dissecting it. Alright, let's begin with the guitar melody. So here's the guitar melody without effect. It sounded lifeless. Then I added a guitar reset. You can basically use any guitar amp plugin that you own, and it will definitely do a great job. Well, I used the preset right in the middle. So this basically pushes the sound out, add more tone to the guitar to make it more realistic. Next up is an EQ, and I just use the EQ to cut the low frequencies because I want to make space for the bass instrument that will come in next. The rule of thumb is, every non-bass instrument, I recommend you remove the low frequencies because you don't need all that low-end rumbles. Alright, the next sound is the counter melody. Before we had this. And to make everything push out, we are using the same effect, the guitar excess, the right in the middle preset, and then EQ to cut the low frequencies as well. Now for the two instruments to fit together, all we do is mess around with the faders or volume. So this is the basics of gain staging. Well, the next instrument we have on the mixer is the morphine melody, which I didn't use in the final beat, so there's no effect added to it. Next up, let's move on to the bass. With the bass also, there's no effect added to it. But this bass is layered with another bass preset, which sounds like this. Well, all I did is to EQ the high ends. So after the EQ, this is what it sounds like. So it's a bass instrument, we don't really need all those mid-high frequencies. Alright, putting the two together, basically you get the sub from the GMS preset, and then the brightness comes from the Omnisphere preset. So when you put it together, here's what it sounds like. Alright, moving on. So here we have a kalimba. This also I didn't add any effect. Next on the mixer track is a marimba. So without effect, it sounds lifeless. And with effect, here's what it sounds like. So I added a delay for movement. So I'm using this Echo Boy delay, and the preset I use is the Aloha guitar. Alright, everything was sounding quite low, so to push everything up, I added a hard compression. I used the R-Vox, and the preset I use is the right in your face vocal preset. So let's move on. Now let's look at the processing on the vocal chops. So before, it sounded like this. And for effect, I added our vox to push the sound out, followed by a reverb to add space to it. And lastly, EQ to make it less prominent in the mix. We are just cutting the low frequencies. Next up, we have this vocal one shot. This also has the Echo Boy preset. Now let's look at this percussion. Originally it sounded like this. So I added fresh air to boost the high end. It's just like another form of EQ, just EQing the high ends of the sound. What else? And we have this vocal one shot. It sounded lifeless like this. So to bring it back to life, I added a delay. And if you add a delay directly on your insert track, your best friend is the wet and dry knob. So this allows you to blend the dry signal with the wet signal. So with the wet signal at 100%, it's not sounding quite glued together. So you may want to adjust the wet and dry knob for it to sound glued together. And finally, a reverb. With the same concept too, you need to adjust the wet and dry knob if it's an insert plugin. Alright, moving on, I added a reverb to this tom hit. So for the drums, they are just basic leveling. You just mess around with the faders for it to sound glued together. There's no effect added on it. Alright, let's go to the master bass. So it's a soft clipper and a limiter. Without it, the whole sound goes over the 0 dB mark. So the soft clipper is here to wrap around the sound that exceeds the 0 dB. With that done, I added a limiter to increase the overall loudness. So I just set the ceiling to, I'm keeping it at minus 0.2. And I just push the threshold down until you hear no distortion. So that's basically how I mix the sound. So it's just basic EQ, compression, reverb, delay, and gain staging. Like always, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.